So welcome again. Happy Father's Day. Turn to Exodus chapter 12 if you have a Bible, or you can download the Bible app for free. Exodus chapter 12. What up to my freaks online? Happy Father's Day to you at home. So how many of you were born before or on in the year of 1977? Come on. Okay. All right, so Star Wars came out in 1977 originally, the first film. I was about 4 years old. I'm 27 now. And so I'm a huge Star Wars fan. As a kid, man, I loved it. I collected the Star Wars action figures. I was raised by my grandparents, so I was a spoiled brat. And anytime we went to the store, I'd be like, I don't have that one. Can I have that one, please, Grandma? And so I'd get Star Wars figures like crazy. I had the original Empire Strikes Back bed sheets and comforter. I mean, I don't want to brag, but it was dope. And so I had that and, the pillowcase and all that stuff. And when I was a kid, I mean, I don't know how many lightsaber battles happened where my thin yellow wiffle ball bat was a lightsaber, because that was perfect. I was like, this is incredible. If I wasn't being Bo Duke, I was being Luke Skywalker. And so, man, I loved Star Wars. So another quick round of applause. How many of you, by round of applause, are 18 years old or younger? There we go. 18 years old. Okay, so my son Journey, my youngest son Journey, when he was 6 years old, he's 15 now, but when he was 6 years old, man, he loved Star Wars. And when I would be working, I had an era where I'd work in the basement a lot, and he would, come home from school or whatever, and he would jet straight downstairs and be like, can you cue up the end of Star Wars, The Phantom Menace, and show me the lightsaber battle, because it's the best lightsaber battle that's happened in the history of cinema, is at the end of Phantom Menace. You can debate me, I will fight you outside afterward. But it's Darth Maul with a double lightsaber fighting Obi-Wan Kenobi and his master Qui-Gon Jinn. And so it's this incredible lightsaber fight. So Journey would go downstairs and he would watch that every day after school, and he had a plastic double lightsaber. And one day, I was looking up from my laptop and paying attention. He's usually be behind me and the TV's here, but he's back behind me getting some more room behind this chair. And I'd look back, and this dude with this double lightsaber was twirling this thing around his head, around his waist, behind the back. I was like, whoa, what kind of ninja skills did you, daily he'd be working on this because he loved Star Wars, and he was great with a double lightsaber, plastic double lightsaber, which fits perfect because his middle name is Journey Battlesmith. And so he was just incredible. Right now, most of my family is watching Obi-Wan Kenobi, the series, and no spoilers. But after the second, maybe third episode, my oldest son, Zion, who is 18, he was like, man, he said, man, I'm loving this. He's getting into every nuance that was happening. Every time there was a reference to the original trilogy or the prequel trilogy, Obi-Wan Kenobi is set right in between. So there's kind of allusions to or setups to. And anytime there was some unique reference or whatever, he's geeking out, loving it, just vibing with it. And then after the second or third episode, he mentioned to us, by the way, I've never seen any of the movies in their entireties out of the first trilogy, the original trilogy, or the prequel trilogy. Now, first off, it's Father's Day. I just want to admit to you, I failed as a father. I have blown it, man. I was like, you've never seen any of them in their entirety? Nope, never. So how does he know all these references? How does he understand every little, hey, here's a hint at something coming in the next trilogy. Here's something that's a reference back to a reappearing character from the prequel. How does he know all this stuff? And wait a minute, Journey, who's loving Star Wars, double lightsabering it, at 6 years old, there had never been a new live-action Star Wars film come out in his lifetime. How in the world does he love Star Wars? What is going on here? Let me just do one thing more. Exhibit C. How many of you that are 18 years or younger, maybe middle school, high schoolers, if there's any even littler kids in here, how many of you love a movie, maybe have posters of and talk about a lot, this movie called Close Encounters of the Third Kind? No? Okay. What about Saturday Night Fever? Give it up for Saturday if you're 18 or younger. What about The Hills Have Eyes, the original Hills? Okay. Not so much. Smokey and the Bandit, y'all. Let's go. 18 or younger. Okay, we got one 18 or younger, all right? We got one nerd geeking out back there. I like it. Slapshot, hockey movie. Paul Newman, like the suit that matches plaid pants. No. Here's the deal. Every one of those movies came out in 1977 with Star Wars, same year. But kids love Star Wars today. How in the world is it? You know how? At least for Journey, at least for my son Zion, Lego Star Wars. They know the stories in and out because they played Lego Star Wars. And so they watch and play Lego Star Wars. The video game itself originally came out in 2005. That was the first original release. But this year, in 2022, they released Lego Star Wars, The Skywalker Saga. Now, in the plot of the video game is all 9 movies. All the other movies, like Rogue One, have characters in there as DLC. And so, explain that to the person next to you if you know. Okay. And so, all the additional characters from the TV shows. So it's all updated with all this stuff in it now. So Lego Star Wars takes all the content of these films, and most of the films were already like PG at least. I mean, there's a PG-13 in the 3rd episode because that was dark. But, so they're already for kids, but they just go ahead and take out and make sure to eliminate. There's no blood whatsoever. You wreck a stormtrooper and Lego pieces fall apart. Like, how G can it get, you know? There's no real violence or whatever, and it's just really for kids. And I love in between levels, they have these cutscenes they go to where they'll show you a part of the story that you don't have to explain. I'm trying to explain video game terminology to some who might not understand it. Cutscene, where you'll finish, fighting, and then it'll go to like a cartoon of the next piece of the story that you need to know. Then you jump in and get involved as a character again. And man, they add so much humor to these cutscenes, things that aren't in the original movies. Like, for instance, at the end of Star Wars, the original movie, A New Hope, 1977, spoiler alert from 1977. This is your fault if you haven't seen it, and my fault as the dad if my son hasn't. But at the end, they blow up this huge space station it's the size of a moon, called the Death Star. And the movie just blows up. In Star Wars, in Lego Star Wars, it explodes. Boom! It just explodes. And then all of a sudden, one random stormtrooper flying through space and just like toward the camera. And you're like, oh man, that's funny. They had a random stormtrooper. One of my favorite scenes is, big spoiler alert in cinema history, Empire Strikes Back. Again, you're bad if this is a spoiler to you. Darth Vader chops off Luke Skywalker's hand and then reveals to him, I am your father. Happy Father's Day, Dad. Chopped off my hand, thanks. Well, in Lego Star Wars, Darth Vader chops off Luke's Lego hand, and then originally in these video games, they didn't talk at all. They mumbled. There's no talking. Now they have voice actors. But in that one, it was just some mumbling going on. And the way he revealed that he was Luke Skywalker's father is he held up a Polaroid picture of 2 parents holding a baby, and he points at the baby and he points at Luke. And Luke goes, and I was like, that is hysterical. That's so classic. Lego does such a great job of like updating and saying, okay, we are telling the story for a new generation. And if it weren't for Star Wars, my sons, I don't know if it would matter with that old school effects and all that stuff. I don't know if I could have talked them into loving Star Wars the way I do. Like, that looks cheesy, Dad, Like, I know, but there's just like that huge monster is like a puppet, Like, they're just making it look cute. But because of Lego Star Wars, they love Star Wars. Lego Star Wars is retelling the story for the next generations of, another Star Wars word, of younglings. Like, this is for the next generation of younglings. And that's how so many kids are still fans. A lot of it's largely due to Lego Star Wars and now the Skywalker Saga. So, turn to Exodus chapter 12. We'll get there eventually. I want to tell you, I don't know if it'll be a rated G version or not. It's kind of hard to keep this one G, and I didn't put a lot of effort into it. So I was like, most of them are downstairs. So this is a story from the Bible. There's a lot of stories in the Bible that aren't rated G if you've perused. This story, though, it's pretty classic. Long ago, God's people, who were called the Israelites, they were made slaves in a country called Egypt. And so the Egyptians made the Israelites just work like crazy, work really hard. And they didn't have much freedom. And so the Israelites eventually cried out to God. And they said, hey, release us, please. We're in this bondage of slavery. Let us go, free us. And so eventually God told one of the Israelites, a guy named Moses, that he wanted Moses to be his leader, his voice, to go to the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and to tell Pharaoh, you let my people go. My Israelites, God's saying, these are my people. I want you to let them go. And so Moses rolls up into the king's throne room, and he tells Pharaoh, God spoke to me, and he said, let his people go or some bad stuff's going to happen. And the Pharaoh said, nope, I want my slaves. And so Moses is like, okay, this isn't going to go well for you. He's like, so God's going to release a plague. And the first plague was a plague of blood. So just for one moment, leave cartoon world in your mind of Lego Star Wars and picture the Nile River turning to blood. Picture how grotesque that would be. No drinking water, all the fish die, just nasty. And that was the first warning, like, God's serious about this. You let these people go. You stop oppressing them, or bad things are going to happen. So it comes back after that plague. God said, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, nope, I want my slaves. So there was a plague of frogs. So that sounds funny until they're in your underwear drawer. You know, until it's not just Kermit popping up for a little cameo. These are frogs everywhere. Mom, there's frogs in my Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Like, they're everywhere, and it's disgusting. So he goes back to the Pharaoh, and it's just plague after plague. There are 9 plagues until the last final 10th one. And the plagues are things like the plague of gnats, which is 3, then in order, plague of flies, the plague on livestock. Notice how they're getting more serious. Like, listen, dude, I'm serious. Let these people go. Then a plague of boils. Ooh, now it's getting personal. It's on my person, okay? Hail, locust, darkness was the 9th one. Darkness should have let you know this is getting spooky, okay? Like, that has a real judgment feel to it, you know? Like, you know how darkness has that when you're like, it's noon, and this is just creepy, man. And so, still, he isn't getting it. Pharaoh is adamant. Nope. I will oppress these people. They'll do whatever I want them to do. I don't know if this is historically what happened. They'll build pyramids. They'll do whatever I tell them to do. And I'm keeping my slaves. And so finally, God says to Moses, okay, I'm going to bring one more plague. And when I do, Pharaoh will let them go. And so he said at about midnight, I'm going to send essentially a destroyer angel to go walk through the streets. And the slaves will be liberated once this happens. Because what he's going to do is he's going to go through the towns in Egypt and the cities of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt will die. From the Pharaoh's firstborn to the slave person who's at the hand mill, the firstborn of the cattle, all the firstborn. And God says it will be awful. In fact, don't even go outside at night this night. It's going to be horrific. But this plague will not happen for people who will obey these instructions. So if you will obey me, you will be untouched by this plague. And so he said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to take a lamb into your home, and basically they'd have it in their home for 4 days. So it's almost like pet level. 4 days, this cute lamb, like, look how cute he is. Let's name, don't name it, you know, that kind of thing. And so they got a lamb in their house, and then eventually on the 4th day, they slaughter the lamb as a family, and they take the blood of the lamb and they put it on the doorpost, the front door frame of their house, on the top of it, on the sides. So there's blood all around your door. And then they roast the lamb for dinner. They have with it some bread without yeast, without leaven, unleavened bread, kind of like matzah or flatbread. And so they have that with the meal. And during the meal, God gives further instructions. I want you to have your jackets on and zipped up, essentially, during this meal. I want you to have your shoes on, your walking shoes. Father's Day, I want you to have your walking sticks in hand while you're eating. I'm a lefty, so you eat and you have your walking stick. You eat and have your walking stick ready to go. I want you to eat the meal really fast. Eat it in haste. Why? Because in the words of Ludacris, I want you to be ready to roll out, okay? Because at any moment, the Pharaoh is going to see what's going on in his land, and he's going to be like, I'm an idiot. I'm so stubborn. Get these Israelites out of here. And I want you to be ready to roll out. A couple of gats, a couple of knives, a couple of rats. Okay, so I want you guys to get out of there and go, and you got to be ready to roll. So at midnight, the destroyer angel comes through, and anyone who obeys God is untouched. But he walks through, and the destroyer comes through, and if he saw blood, the blood of the sacrificial lamb over the door, on the door frame, then for that house, the destroyer angel would pass over that house and would work his way through, and the people would be saved in that house. And that's how God delivered the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, and through their obedience, they were spared, of course, that plague. But here's what's cool. Afterwards, God said, you know that whole meal thing you had to do on that particular night? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to make that meal a special holiday called a Passover meal. And in Exodus 20, he says this. He says, obey the instructions. I can see him, you can't? He says, obey the instructions and as a lasting ordinance for you and your descendants. And when your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? Then tell them, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt and spared our homes when he struck down the Egyptians. So every year after they were freed from slavery, they would kill a lamb for dinner, eat bread without yeast, dress like they're ready to roll out and eat really fast. And then their kids would look around and say, wait a minute, why are we doing this? Why can't we take our time eating? Why can't we have the big fluffy bread like we usually do? Why can't we have steak? You know, like, why are we doing this particular thing right now? Why? They will ask, and you will have a chance to tell the story to the next generation of younglings. Like, this story is really important. Don't miss it. You will have a chance to tell them. And so that's exactly what would happen. Every year they would remember it. In fact, a really cool thing happens in the next chapter, Exodus 13, speaking specifically to fathers, Father's Day again. Exodus 13, God commands Moses to tell the fathers of Israel, on that day when you're celebrating this meal, tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. This observance will be for you, Moses tells the fathers, like a sign on your hand, like a reminder on your forehead, that this law of the Lord is to be on your lips. You should be telling it. For the Lord brought you out of Egypt with his mighty hand. And so what God says here is, fathers, you have to look for the opportunities to retell this story. And as you retell it, even reenact it and sing different songs during it and, relive the story for kids that weren't a part of it. If you do that, it'll be like a tattoo on your hand or a Mike Tyson tattoo on your forehead that people are going to look at you and say, why? I noticed that. Why did you get that? Well, I said, because I used to be a boxer. No, so, you would see it and you would notice and you'd be like, Dad, why are we doing this? And you get to say, because of what the Lord did for me. Like, you didn't see it, but I'm retelling the story. We're reenacting it in a sense because I want you to see it. So then your kid will get to thank and celebrate what God has done in the history of your family. Why are we doing this? Man, I'm doing this because my father taught me this, but my father was a part of this original story. I'm doing this because our grandfather and our grandmother, we're doing this because, and it would be passed on generation to generation. It's like kids now who love Star Wars way after it came out in 1977. How do you know the story? Lego Star Wars, retelling it for a new generation of younglings. And that's our job as parents with the story of God. So in Star Wars, a Jedi youngling is a Force-sensitive child who is sent to the Jedi Temple to learn the way of the Jedi. And so I'm just going to use that as my term for our kids in the sense of, man, we've got younglings around us that need to hear God's story told primarily by us. Like, Mo Kids is a great, what's the word I'm looking for? When you have a supplement, vitamin is a supplement. Mo Kids is not the primary way that your kids should learn the story of God. It should be through the parents or the guardians or the grandparents the legal guardians, the Cleveland guardians, whatever guardians are around, like any of them. And so, it could be older siblings. It could be babysitters. It could be YouTubers. People have the opportunity to tell God's story to the next generation of younglings. Mike Love, who's a dad at Momentum, he's also an elder, happens to be at Momentum. He's been telling Bible stories. He and Lauren, who leads our student ministry here, Amplify, they have two sons, Luke and James. Luke is the older. So he's been telling stories for bedtime, Bible stories, to Luke for a little while now. And he says, man, it really only takes like 2 or 3 minutes to tell a story, like from the scriptures. And it's not super hard as far as it doesn't take much time. But he said, I'm pretty repetitive, though, with the stories that I tell. And I was like, oh, that's relieving to know, because I was the same as a dad. I didn't tell the Bible, like, hey, kids, we're just going to work our way through the whole thing. Like, no, Lord, no. Like, I had a few. And so he told me what stories he does. And I was like, well, that's a better repertoire than I thought. And so you can't see it? But so anyways, I was like, that's more of a repertoire than I thought. That might be more than mine. But he said, yeah, these are the ones that I tell. And so he would tell these stories to Luke in his own way. And he added Lego Star Wars humor to it. Like in David and Goliath, David might also fight a T-Rex. And so that's just Mike Love's version, the MLV version. And so that's not NIV, that's MLV. And so anyway, so that's the story he tells. And man, that was my experience too. When I would tell Bible stories to my kids as like a bedtime story, there were like 2 that they would latch on to. They always wanted, because they were maybe the funniest. And they weren't even like main stories of the Bible. One of them, the main one, was the Lord speaking to young Samuel in 1 Samuel 3. And I just added my own voices and added my own humor to it. And they would be rolling laughing like, oh, please don't laugh too hard. Don't wet the bed. Like, here we go. But I was like, okay, like, well, let's move on. Let's tell this story. No, we want the Lord speaks to Samuel. They usually latch on to a couple stories. The other one for me was David and Goliath, because of the kid humor and David being young in it. And so they often will request, no matter how big your repertoire gets, here are the ones we love. And that was the same for Mike. And so on nights when Mike doesn't feel like telling a story, most nights I didn't feel like telling a story. It's not because Dan's some rock star, whatever. Like, most times, like, guys, we're just going to go ahead and pray real quick and put you, but no, we want a story! And they rise up, or whatever. And so, like, okay, it's an uprising. Like, okay, tell a story. But he said, man, on those nights, he goes, a lot of times Luke will now prompt me and say, Daddy, will you tell me the story of how Jesus put mud on the blind man's eyes to heal him? And so he knows these stories, and he can even tell chunks of it back himself now, because Mike has been so in practice of just telling them some stories, God's story, passing it on to the next generation of younglings. And Mike says, man, I'm really curious to know, how will this affect and help Luke growing up with these stories of God in his database? He says, because I didn't hear those stories growing up at all, but I wish I did. And so instilling those stories and giving those stories of Jesus and from the big picture of the Bible stories. And pro tip, I think a couple pro tips you learned from Mike right there, just to relieve you. For example, fathers, since it's Father's Day, take a few short Bible stories, tell them on repeat. Just make a small repertoire, just start telling them on repeat, and then build your repertoire from there. But I think both Mike and I would agree. It isn't hard in the sense it only takes 2 or 3 minutes, but it does take effort and intentionality. It's the time when I least want to be telling a story, usually, because I'm exhausted from the day, but I'm like, man, this matters. I'm going to tell some stories. And so Mike Love, he's just a Christian dad. He's not perfect, but he's just passing God's story on to the next generation of younglings. Jason Liu, who's also happens to be an elder at Momentum, he and his wife Cindy have 2 kids, Nathan and Lucy. Yes, I said it right, Lucy Liu. And they tell stories. She's famous. She's a big movie star. They tell stories. They had this thing they did called lantern stories. And I wish I knew this when I had littler kids. But lantern stories, they would take a camping lantern, put it in the center of the room, turn the lights out. And I'm like, man, I love this already. I love this idea. And it was almost like a campfire story and kind of involved like a light show. And they would take Bible stories and retell them in a creative way, using often the stuffed animals, which is awesome, using the stuffed animals to retell the story. And Jason admits that usually every story, Bible story, ended with one of the stuffed animals pooping. Why not? Why not? And so they loved that. And so whenever they would tell a story of Moses, they got into voices and stuff, and they would typically say, Moses. And he says now, like Nathan's going into high school, whenever his kids read a story that has Moses in it, they still say it that way. Then the Lord said to Moses, and that's how they tell the story, because they remember this. They remember these lantern stories as a kid. And their daughter, Lucy, her favorite story, which I love too, is a story of a judge or a warrior. Judge doesn't look like, picture Judge Dredd, that kind of judge. Like a warrior-type judge named Ehud, who is basically a left-handed assassin. I'm a left-hander, and so I'm like, I love these. I'm Ehud, man, left-handed assassin. And he goes and kills a fat, evil king on the toilet. And Lucy was like, I want that one. Play it again. I'm like, who wouldn't love that one? Because there's an animal pooping at the end of that story, okay? So it's just a funny story, but it's also Lego Star Wars. It's like a violent story that's turned into Lego pieces falling apart with some humor added. And so, pro tip, I think, from Jason Liu and from Cindy, man, use stuffed animals, use props, use funny voices, and maybe some potty humor, in your Bible stories. Because you're making it Lego Star Wars. You're passing the story on to the next generation of younglings. And so Jason Liu, he's not perfect. He's just a Christian dad who's like, this is my job as a Christian father, is to pass on the story of God to the next generation of younglings. And, there's different things you can do. You can switch it up. Like one time, you can act out the story or have your kids act it out. One time for Christmas, I usually read Luke chapter 2, the Christmas story, before we open presents on Christmas. And one year we had them act it out. And so when our kids were little, we had 2 boys and a girl. So we had a Joseph, a Mary, and a baby Jesus. And I kind of told the story, and they acted those things out as we told the story. My wife, one of the things she did is when she was a kid, she learned the 66 books of the Bible in order. So she taught that to the kids. I grew up in a pagan home. I knew Bob Probert and Joey Koser, who punched people on the Red Wings. I knew the sports thing. She grew up learning the books of the Bible. She's like, I'm going to teach them the order of the books of the Bible. And they learned it with her at night. They'd practice it and learn more before bedtime at night. And I was like, man, that's a great way to invest in the next generation of younglings. Then another one is just simply this. You could say, man, I want to learn to memorize something with my kids. It could be a one-line verse, John 3:16. I do this some with my kids when they were little or for bedtime. The most epic one we did was we memorized all of Psalm 23. And what they didn't know is I was recording an album at the time, and I was like, I got a surprise for you when we all master this. And so when they memorized Psalm 23, I told them, okay, here's the thing we're going to do. You're going to go to the studio where Daddy records songs, and you guys are going to get to speak your memorized verse into the microphone, and we're going to record your voice saying Psalm 23. And it was awesome. They went nuts, man. They're like, we want to see it, and we want to see all the buttons and all that kind of stuff, And so they came to the studio with me, and they each separately got to recite Psalm 23. And so here's a clip from 11 years ago. My son Journey's 15. This is him at 4 years old, the audio and a picture of him at the studio reciting it.
Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet water. He restores my soul. He guides me in battle lightning for a name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll feel no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. You prepare the table before me, and a bed on my enemy. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
I can't. I can't. Why did I show that right now? It's so stupid. So that's my dude, Journey Dog. So I was like, why? I'm so stupid to put that in the middle of my sermon. I should have ended with that because I'm just going to walk off and cry. But here's a pro tip from what I learned. You don't have to act like you know all the Bible. I said to them, and I'm a preacher, I'm going to learn Psalm 23 with you. Like, I knew chunks of it, but I'd never memorized it. And so I sat down with them and was like, we're just going to, one line a night, we're just going to work on it together. In fact, like I said, he was like 4 years old at the time. And honestly, in my stupidity, I focused on the two older kids. And he was like, can I play over here? I was like, sure, dude. So he'd play. And we got like 3 weeks into it. And they're like, I don't know, 4 lines into Psalm 23. And I was like stumbling apart. And Zion's stumbling apart. Aslan's stumbling. All of a sudden, he pipes up in the background. He restored my soul. And he starts, like, you've been listening this whole time? He had, because littler you are, you're like wet cement, man. Like, it just, they memorize so well. So I just was honest with them. Like, I don't know this. Daddy's going to learn it with you. Oh, we're doing this together. Heck yeah, we are. And so we did it together, man. And very important. If you memorize even just one little verse, get it on video. Oh my gosh, you will treasure it your whole life, and I'll make you preach a sermon where you show it in the middle and you'll have to cry. So, but yeah, so that's a pro. So my daily challenge or weekly challenge. Sometimes video games have daily challenges and weekly challenges in it. My Momentum's weekly challenge is this: primarily lean into the dads, who love Jesus. But man, read, learn, sing, act out, or tell 1 or 2 Bible stories or Bible passages a week with your younglings. Like, it's super intimidating to start. It was for me, and I do this for a living. But to be like, okay, I'm just going to tell this little story. Kids are so forgiving. Like, you hack through a story a couple times, you learn how to tell it on your own, and eventually they're begging for you in your voice to tell that story. And so it's just, take the challenge to be like, I'm going to make the effort. Not some weeks you're going to blow it. You're like, I didn't do anything with them. Some weeks you can be like, I did something with them most nights. And just to say, I'm going to make my goal, my weekly challenge, 1 or 2 nights where I work on a story, tell a story, whatever with them. 3 resources that will help out. 1 is the Bible app for kids. We typically encourage people to download the Bible app for big people. But there's a Bible app for kids, an app that's specifically kid-focused, kid-specific app. Just a ton of great resources for kids and parents. And it acts a little bit like when a kid's using it, it acts a little bit like a video game that leads you through the Bible storyline. So it's an incredible resource. Also, the Bible app for kids has a hard copy, hardcover version of Bible stories, like a children's Bible with several stories in it. And so that's something you could read to your kid or use and cheat and steal from how they tell the story and tell it in your own words. That's just another way to do it. And that's a great way for older siblings. This is a great way for you to be, the Jedi master for a Padawan or a youngling. And to say, I want to teach them stories and pass them on to my little brother, my little sister. When I was, when I first became a Christian, eventually 16, 17 years old, none of my family went to church except for me. And my brother's about 9.5 years younger than me. And I knew the only way he's going to learn stories of Jesus, stories of God, are going to be through me. And so I kind of took it on me of like, I got a kid's Bible, that was like picture-based and all that. And when I'd remember and think about it, I'd be like, hey, let me read you or tell you a story. And I would read those to my little brother because I knew he's not going to get the story of God in any other way. And I want to pass this on to my little brother because I love my little brother and I want him to hear about Jesus. Second resource is something called Parent Q. They have a website, tons of articles, even about things like mental health, but it's a Christian group. And so Parent Q has all kinds of resources for parents at their website, but they also have a YouTube channel, man, with videos and music for preschool kids and elementary students. And so that's a great resource. And then another one that I love is Crossroads Kids Club. I introduced, by Lauren Love and Nicole Gates here at Momentum to that a few years ago. And they have tons of great animated videos that are short. They have worship videos that teach children the story of God, the next generation of younglings. And they also have a ton of animated shorts, basically, that fit into one of their subheadings of God's story. And they're basically just Bible stories, and they explain how they point those stories to the big picture of the Bible. How does this relate to the gospel, the good news of Jesus as a whole? And at the end of those videos, they usually do a quick recap. Here's what we covered. This happened, and this happened. And they're just great resources to either put on shuffle in your living room while kids are playing, or to watch one together and talk about it as a family, or to say, I'm going to watch it and I'm going to steal ideas and verbiage so I can tell a bedtime story to my kids. It's just a great resource. And it reminds me of Deuteronomy 6, which excuse me, is one of my favorite, maybe my favorite parenting passage in Scripture, as simple as it is. Deuteronomy 6, Moses says, he says, love the Lord your God. Impress these commandments on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. And man, it's a humbling thing to look at that picture as a Christian dad and be like, am I taking those opportunities in life around the dinner table, at bedtime, as we go for walks, to tell them the story of God and to pass it on to the next generation, to be Lego Star Wars, to make sure they know and understand the story. And if you have great ideas, because I know there's so many people at Momentum who have great ideas and little things like the lantern stories, it's incredible. Pass them on. Tell me. I'd love to share them with people and pretend they're mine. And so Dan at MomentumChurch.com, I don't mind stealing your ideas at all and taking credit for it. So one cool thing to wrap up is one cool thing about the Bible is that everything in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, is constantly pointing forward to. Just like it's always prophesying and foreshadowing and all this stuff to the gospel, the good news of Jesus. Like this is the central part of the story. Always pointing to God coming to earth as a man, dying on the cross, and then rising from the dead, the empty tomb. And then everything after it in the New Testament that happens is like, man, you know how important that was? You know what the cross did for us? You know the empty tomb, why that's a big deal? It's always pointing, because that's the central message of first importance in Scripture. And so the Passover and the Exodus, they were really just foreshadowing the Jesus that was to come. That whole story. And so the New Testament explains that after Jesus died on the cross and he rose from the dead, the New Testament explains to us that we're all sinners. Like, to be honest, we're all in the exact same camp as stubborn Pharaoh. Like, we have all lived in rebellion to God. But God's clear, man, there will be judgment and justice and wrath for this world of rebellion. All the terrible things that are happening in the world, God just can't wink at it or turn his head or be like, oh, boys will be boys. That's not, there has to be justice for the wrongs done. That's Pharaoh's oppression. Later, it's the Israelites' lack of faithfulness. It's my lust. It's your ex-spouse's affair. It's your selfishness. I mean, it's all that stuff. It demands justice from a holy God. But God has provided a way of mercy. That's the gospel. That there's a way of deliverance, an exodus from the bondage of the bondage of sin that we live in, and there is an exodus, a way of mercy, and that is that Jesus is our Passover lamb, and that he's our perfect lamb without blemish. Yeast is an image and a metaphor for sin in the Bible because it's something that grows inside of you, and so Jesus is a lamb without blemish, a perfect lamb, and we got this unleavened bread, so there's no yeast in the bread. There's all this imagery that points forward to Jesus, who voluntarily laid down his life. And he didn't just live with us for 4 days. He came to walk with us on earth and to live among us, and then voluntarily laid down his life. And if we put our faith in Jesus, it's like putting blood over the door frames and along the sides of the door frames of our home. That's how we are covered with the blood of the Lamb, as Christians say it. And when that happens, that means that God's wrath for our sin and rebellion, it passes over us because Jesus has already paid the sacrificial role for our sin and rebellion. And so, as a New Testament Christian, as New Testament Christians, for those of you who live on this side of the cross, the resurrection, the main story of God that we pass on to the next generation of younglings is no longer the Passover and the Exodus. That was the dominant story of the Old Testament Hebrew Scriptures. Now we realize that the centerpiece of the entire Scriptures and history is the gospel of Jesus, and that is the main story, that we teach our younglings God came as a human baby. He taught us love God and love people. He showed us how much he loves us by dying for us as a sacrifice on the cross. And this last part, when I'd pray it for my younglings when they were a kid at night when we'd go to bed and pray, and I'd say, God, thank you that Jesus died on the cross and that he rose from the grave defeating, and I would leave a blank there so my kids would say, he rose from the dead, conquered the grave, defeating, and they would yell, death. And that was always the blank they fill in. Jesus defeated death. And so that's what they would say at the end. That is the good news. Be Lego Star Wars to the younglings around you in your life. Happy Father's Day. May the Force be with you. Let's pray.